If you're a southern commuter due to travel tomorrow, a clear message from the rail company today: you can't. The operator is telling passengers not even to attempt to get into London because of a 48-hour strike in the long-running battle between the company and the unions over driver-only trains. With the latest, including a last-minute court case to try to stop the action, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Southern are sorry to announce that
Yet again at Victoria, more tiresome announcements.
to Sutton has been cancelled due to a temporary shortage of train crews.
But today there was a new grim message for southern commuters: don't even try to travel tomorrow.
The advice for tomorrow, when there is an ASLEF driver strike, is to avoid travelling, because we will not be able to run any services at all on our southern network. So that's the advice for tomorrow.
That brought a swift response from commuter groups.
It's outrageous, of course. Like, what we've got now is a complete shutdown of service. It was bad enough already, and now that's it. We can't travel from the south.
The long-running row on Southern is over plans to give traditional guards a new title, onboard supervisor, and put drivers in charge of closing train doors. For much of 2016, southern commuters have been forced to put up with delays and cancellations. But tomorrow's drivers' strike will be the first to bring the entire timetable to a standstill. The government claimed to have tried to talk to the unions on condition they called off the strikes.
It's a completely unnecessary strike. It's messing up passengers' lives. We've invited them for more talks to try and resolve this. Yesterday, over the weekend, they simply didn't turn up.
Chris GRAYLING did not try and call me at the weekend. I had offline private confidential conversations with the company. How he was party of those conversations and how he's repeating them in the press, I'm rather intrigued.
Last week, Southern failed to persuade a High Court judge to grant an injunction outlawing the strike. Today, the company tried a last-ditch appeal and failed in that legal action too. The strike is on.
Simon, with all we've seen over the past few months with Southern, we've not seen this. How bad is it going to be tomorrow?
Yes, until now, the strikes have only involved the guards, members of the RMT union. So Southern's been able to run some trains. But tomorrow's action involves drivers, members of ASLEF. And Southern isn't going to try to run even a limited service. That means 2,200 trains will not appear tomorrow or Wednesday or Friday. And it's not just on Southern, because some Southern drivers work on the Gatwick Express. So that's going to be affected as well, disrupted if not at a complete standstill, which has a huge knock-on effect for thousands of air passengers trying to get to Gatwick Airport. And the bad news is we are talking something like 300,000 rail passengers will be affected during these strikes.
Simon, until tomorrow, thank you. The biggest rail strike in decades has begun. No trains whatsoever were run by Southern today, as not one but two rail unions went out on strike. The worst disruption for 20 years was exacerbated by signal failure on the Victoria line this morning, leaving many commuters in South London stranded. This is just day one of 3 days of action this week. So is there any hope talks being held tomorrow will finally see an end to the dispute? Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Rush hour at East Croydon, where commuters first had to complete an obstacle course of crowd barriers. For strike-weary regulars, the chicane was a novelty, the disruption was not.
This is the first time I'm really late. For me to come in here and see this kind of queue, it's very disappointing to me.
Telling my manager every day that there's delays, it's hard.
I've kind of just given up really and just hope for the best.
The only train that goes north is packed with hundreds of people.
Some Southern passengers got lucky and squeezed their way onto trains run by sister companies like Thameslink. Others headed by bus to Brixton to catch the tube, only to find overcrowding caused by an ill-timed signal failure on the Victoria line. For many commuters, it was a day of chaos, anger and stress. But in the middle of it all, there was one oasis of tranquility. Here at Southern's busiest station, London Victoria, the platforms were empty. Watching from above, the public face of Southern during this dispute, Passenger Services Director Angie Doll.
Passengers have heeded our advice not to travel today.
Are you embarrassed at having to give that advice?
Well, absolutely. You know, it's not something that we want to do to advise people not to travel. You know, we've been desperately...
Some people need to travel for their jobs.
Yeah. We've desperately been trying to avoid the strikes. You know, I'd like to apologise to passengers.
In a glimmer of hope, the two sides agreed to talk tomorrow, but the strike and disruption will continue. Why not call off the strike and see what they'll offer you?
Why don't we talk and then see if there's any value in it to see if it's worth calling the strike off?
So this is deadlocked?
It's not deadlocked. More than willing...
You won't move, they won't move. That sounds like deadlock.
Well, I don't know if they'll move because I haven't met with them yet.
The despair of passengers was summed up by a Facebook picture of a 6-year-old in his pyjamas on a wet street. It was posted by his mum as she began a 3.5-hour commute.
I was exhausted, had this awful journey yesterday as well. Saw my son walking down the street this morning in the rain. His blanket started to drag along the floor and I just started crying because I think, you know, the mother's guilt gets to you as well, and I just felt really awful that we were having to do this.
If tomorrow's talks at ACAS fail to break the deadlock, it all happens again on Friday. Simon Harris, ITV News, Victoria.
I'm joined now by Simon Harris. Talks tomorrow, we found out in the last couple of hours. Any hope those talks will lead to resolution in this very, very long-running dispute?
Well, this dispute over so-called driver-only operated trains has been going on for 7 months now. We've had talks before which have come to nothing, so nobody should get too excited. Having said that, Southern's parent company, GTR, said it had reached out to ASLEF today and it was determined to find a solution. The union seems to think the company is prepared to move. But let's add the caution. Let's not forget that the nature of Southern's contract with the Department for Transport means that the company is simply doing the government's bidding, and there's no sign that ministers are prepared to compromise in their determination to change the way the railway industry operates. And if GTR simply repeats the same old message about driver-only operated trains tomorrow, I think the union negotiators will get up and walk out.
Simon, thank you. Many are calling the Southern rail strike political. The Prime Minister today called it appalling, but there seems no sign either side is ready to call it off. So what began as 3 days of action today, yesterday and Friday looks like it's going to take out the whole working week, with severe disruption expected tomorrow. First, how was today? Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
When you're not wanted, the revolving door can be ruthless. Just ask RMT boss Mick Cash. Not long after he turned up at ACAS for today's Southern Rail peace talks, he was turfed out, or at least politely asked to leave.
Unfortunately, the company have refused us, the RMT, access to these talks, put obstacles in the way to get a resolution to this dispute, and showed utter contempt for us as a trade union.
Southern's parent firm GTR had a different take. Mr Cash, it seems, was a gatecrasher. According to the company, the RMT wasn't even invited to the meeting because the talks were about the drivers' strike involving ASLEF members, not the guards' strike involving RMT members. That's why Mick Cash was turned away. Day 2 of the drivers' strike, and it's an extra early alarm call for Kate Hayes. First, she must get a lift from her husband to Redhill because there are no trains from her local station. But then she's used to having her commute wrecked by the Southern dispute.
We've gone through Redhill numerous times without stopping. Sometimes we're chucked off at East Croydon. People have ended up at Gatwick without realising it. That's standard for a Southern passenger.
In the Commons, the Prime Minister called on Jeremy Corbyn to help bring an end to the commuter misery.
I think the Leader of the Opposition could do something to help members of the public. The Labour Party is funded by ASLEF. Why doesn't he get on the phone and tell them to call a strike off immediately?
After more than 5 hours at ACAS, both sides said the talks were productive.
Well, we've had some talks with the ASLEF trade union. We're very cordial, and we've adjourned for today, and we've agreed to meet under the auspices of ACAS tomorrow morning.
But ASLEF's General Secretary wasn't prepared to suspend the next strike as a gesture of goodwill.
Well, when we get a sign of goodwill that's mutually acceptable to both parties within this process, maybe we can consider that.
For now, Friday's strike is on. Thursday will be strike-free, but commuters are unlikely to notice much difference. Tomorrow will be another grisly day on Southern. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Ivor, thank you. As you can see, Simon's with me now. You're fast becoming our Southern Rail strike correspondent, not political correspondent. This has been going on since April. Could it go on into the new year now?
Well, there are certainly strikes planned for the new year and indeed next week. But if GTR can cut a deal with the ASLEF and get the drivers back to work, the picture might change. Now, the company says the RMT wasn't invited today because it only represents 12 drivers. But if you were a cynic, you might conclude that it is not necessarily unhelpful to the company if it can drive a wedge between the two unions. Imagine a scenario, perhaps, where the drivers in ASLEF are given new guarantees about operating the doors. That would then put immense pressure on the RMT to settle, not least because it's RMT members who've been on strike the longest and who've lost the most pay.
Simon, thank you.
Tomorrow's strike on Southern Rail will go ahead after talks to resolve the dispute ended without a deal. It means no trains at all for 500,000 passengers for the third day this week. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is here. Simon, how close did they get to a deal?
Not very, I think, is the honest answer. By mid-afternoon, it was clear that even if the two sides could agree, it was too late to stop tomorrow's disruption, and in the end, they couldn't do a deal. Southern's parent company, GTR, says it put forward half a dozen proposals to do with the introduction of new modern trains which can be operated by the driver alone without the guards, which is what the dispute is all about. But after some encouraging words yesterday from both sides about good progress, the talks at ACAS came to nothing, and GTR accused the union, ASLEF, of simply refusing to call off tomorrow's strike.
It's a deeply entrenched position that they have, and it's one, obviously, with which we disagree. But our real sorrow is for the passengers who suffer yet another day of inconvenience and difficulty in their lives while this unnecessary and unjustified action takes place.
We're incredibly sorry. You know, we do not want to be alienating the customers and the passengers. I spend most of my time promoting this railway. I want a well-invested, greener railway. I want a safer operation. And I make it quite clear, this isn't about leverage, this isn't about money. This is purely about what we say it's about safety.
Now, that all sounds depressingly familiar, but ASLEF thinks there is scope for further discussion and expects to be back talking to the company sometime next week. ASLEF isn't due to strike again until the middle of January, so there is time. But of course, next week, it's the RMT back again having their strikes, the conductors walking out, and with ASLEF drivers operating an overtime ban, it's going to be worse than it has been.
Right, Simon, thanks very much.